Are going to start recording. So, thank you for reminding me. There we go. Okay. So yeah, if everybody would put yourself on mute, unless you have a question, I would we would all appreciate it. And let me start by saying thank you all for your interest and participating today. Just a little bit about, you know, where you know, about what I've been what was going through my mind when we set this up. I'm part of Wine America, which is a national organization of wineries. And many people have been talking about soil health as not only good for the grapes and good for the wine, but also good for the environment, good for your bottom line. And so, you know, I was asked to join a group at the Department of Agriculture who's working on some new agreements and processes towards soil health. And I thought, well, this is great information and a great program. So I wanted to make sure we can share it with vineyard owners and with orchard. Also, you know, there is a retail component to this. And I think it's important that, you know, we remember that and try to get wineries and farm stands and restaurants involved in that process, because that helps to raise funds for the on-farm projects that the programs we're going to talk about today make available to growers. So, you know, since we started doing this, there was a wonderful article in the Colorado Sun on February 13th about a Mesa County farmer and rancher who's been employing regenerative agriculture. And I'll let some of the experts here talk about terminology, but I think regenerative agriculture is one of the terms that when we talk about sustainable farming or soil health, we're also talking about regenerative, right? So, but this is a great article. Again, it's in the Colorado Sun and was linked to in the email I sent out a couple of weeks ago. Also in that same email, you know, the economics of soil health systems. And it was exciting to see that, yes, there are economic benefits to improving your soil health. And for those of you who were in VINCO or the Western Colorado Horticulture Society Conference, Kelly Hepler and Martha Sullins from CSU did a presentation on agritourism. And one of the things they mentioned is, you know, if you have unique programs in place on your property for advancing environmental issues or responsibility, that is something people will come visit. People will come, you know, want to experience that. And so, you know, many things I think have come together here to make this the time for soil health. So again, I really appreciate everybody's interest and I appreciate our speakers here. So Cindy, do you want to chime in here? Let me introduce Cindy Lair, from the Conservation Services Division of the Department of Agriculture. Cindy works with the conservation districts across the state, yes. Which, you know, is also interesting because we are at opposite ends of the building at the Department of Agriculture, which we occasionally go to. But, you know, I realized when we started these conversations, I know very little about the conservation districts. So thank you. Cindy, Welcome, thank you.
And thank you, Doug. It's really nice to be here to talk to all of you and to hear your thoughts on this. I noticed that Paul Currier is on the call, and I met Paul at Lowell King's farm, which is the article that you're talking about. So it's like everything is all connected. And Paul actually knows quite a bit about soil health. And so Paul, we're not going to get as deep into it as you do. And I've seen Paul in a soil pit talking about all the aspects and of what we're able to view. And so thanks for being here, everybody. And I've worked with Doug for years in the same building, but we haven't done a lot together. We get together and celebrate each other's birthday on May 17th each year because
all the good people are born on May 17th.
Yeah. Yes, they are. And so I work with the conservation districts. There are 74 conservation districts in Colorado, and they help deliver voluntary incentive-based conservation. And we also have the State Conservation Board in my shop, and they help provide governance and oversight for the 74 conservation districts. And they provide administrative assistance and some funding for conservation projects at the local level. And so they do a lot, and they're also very independent. You cannot find two identical conservation districts anywhere, and there's about 3,000 of these conservation districts across the country. And that's what I love about them. They all have a unique flavor, all of their own, and their own unique priorities. And so I have to say this, there are a lot of terms that we use when we talk about improving resilience, improving the land stewardship, and things like that. We've been just using conservation for about the last 80 or so years. And then we got sustainable ag a few years ago, back in the 80s. And then now the buzzword is regenerative ag. And at first I was just, hold on, we're doing conservation. And then I heard, oh my gosh, I heard a really great professor from USDA ARS talk about it, and he said, his name was Jerry Hatfield, and he said that he used to think about it all as conservation, and then he realized, he got to thinking about it, conservation is protecting the way it is. Well, the way it is may not be the best way it could be, because we've been losing soil in a lot of different scenarios for a long time. And so regenerative ag is a good word to use, and it isn't just a new age buzzword, because it is the act of regenerating the soil, regenerating this biome. And I'm not going to get into that because that's Lisa's area, but we use a lot of different terms, and I hope you'll use whatever term is right for you, but don't get caught up in the buzzwords and don't get turned off by them, because I think what we're all talking about is the same thing. So I'm just glad to be able to talk about it with grape growers and fruit growers. You all are doing a lot of great things already, and soil isn't a big problem. Soil loss isn't usually a big problem in your circumstances. There are a lot of things that can be done, and also there are a lot of market opportunities, as Doug brought up. So so glad you all are here, and I'm really so glad to be able to work with Helen and Lisa, because they're great, really great practitioners, and they know what they're doing, and I'm excited for you to hear from them as well. So let's get started.
Thank you very much. Just quickly, if you guys have questions, please type them into the chat, and we will get to them. Don't hesitate to ask questions either. We are encouraging everyone to participate, because we want you to get as much value out of this whole experience as possible. So Yeah, let me introduce Lisa Aish.
Lisa Aish.
Aish, sorry, my bad. From CSU, a soil specialist, and Lisa's going to talk about the principles of soil health. So,
nice to see everyone today. Like Cindy was mentioning, I know a lot of us have some expertise in soil health, but I think it's important to talk about it in reference to the STAR program, just to get on the same page about all this terminology and why soil is important. And it's also just a really fun topic to talk about in my non-biased opinion. So do we have the presentation up? Or
we're just going to each individually share our screens. Although I can share my screen.
okay, yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Oh, on the Zoom. Yeah, that would be great. And then just go to the slides. Thanks, Helen. Yeah, and just go to the next slide, please. So, like Cindy was mentioning, there's kind of been a shift in the way that we think about soil. So I'll just give everybody a couple minutes to read these two definitions of soil. One is a bit more antiquated from the Soil Science Society of America, and then one is a newer definition from the NRCS. So let's just read these and then kind of think about what the difference between these two definitions is. So is there any glaring differences that people notice between these two?
Well, the Soil Science Society sure sounds very sterile.
Yeah, that's a good, especially in the way we think about soil health as a focus on biology. That's a really good way to describe it. Is there anything else that people notice?
I think it just paints a really nice picture of soil as more than just a canvas upon which other things happen. Like soil is an end goal in and of itself, and endlessly fascinating in pretty much every aspect. Again, unbiased.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So there's a bunch of functions that soil has in and of itself that don't have to do with crop production, but also really support crop production. So how do we measure the function of soil as more than just what we see above the surface? It's a full ecosystem that can be managed to provide nutrients, absorb and hold rainwater, filter and buffer pollutants, and also serve as the foundation for all of our agricultural production that's so important in this country. It also has a focus on the biology of soil, which is something that we didn't consider until pretty recently. So you'll see that as like a really important thread that goes throughout this presentation. And I see a comment that short clinical definitions are helpful, and definitely. And I think we'll have a definition of soil health a little bit later in this presentation that is more succinct, because who wants to read that whole paragraph, you know? But I think the shift from just looking at as a medium in which to grow plants to a functioning ecosystem is really the important point here. So this is kind of highlighting all the different functions that soil provides. It's water storage and purification. A really healthy soil is really good at storing water and not releasing it into the atmosphere, which we know is really important, especially in dry land areas and arid regions like Colorado. It helps store carbon. It serves as a habitat for a myriad of soil biota, billions of species of bacteria, and then all the way up to earthworms that we can see, and even some animals and insects. And then supplies nutrients and retains nutrients that then support crop production. So there's been more of an emphasis on the crop production in history and less of an emphasis on all of the other functions that are happening below ground. So if you want to shift to the next slide, Helen. And we were really successful at focusing on crop production. So this graph is showing the amount of land that it takes to produce a specific quantity of crops throughout time. This is starting in 1961, taking us pretty much up until present. So you can see that we can produce the same amount of food on less than half the land in some regions. So this has been really important in sustaining our growing population, increasing yields, and this has been in thanks to improved varieties, mechanization, really great fertilizer technology, great pesticides. And so that's enabled us to really increase our crop production, which has been so important in sustaining our world's population. And if you go to the next slide. But this has had the unintended consequence that we've kind of ignored all the other processes that are happening below the soil. And as a result, we've lost 50 to 70% of our original carbon stocks. More than 75% of the Earth's land is degraded. And this is really important because it kind of threatens the longevity of agricultural production. So if we think into the future, you know, our yields have drastically increased, but will they be able to stay that way? And will we even be able to increase yields? So now we're shifting to start caring about soils and farm in a more sustainable way. I think this is really important too, because if we bolster those internal processes that are so important for soil function and soil health, we can reduce our inputs. So this really affects bottom line too, just in terms of buying less fertilizer, not having to rely so much on pesticides and fungicides. So this isn't just an environmental problem, this is also an economic issue. And I think by leveraging soil health and functions in the soil, we can really have improvements to our bottom line too. Next slide, Helen. So this is just kind of bringing it back to how all of these different functions support crop and forage production. And again, just bolstering these cycles, we can reduce our inputs. And this is a more succinct version of soil health from the NRCS, which is the continued capacity of soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. So a healthy soil will capture water more readily, so we have less runoff, and we can use the little precipitation that we get more efficiently. We can regulate the climate and improve organic matter levels in the soil, which then provides a nutrient pool to sustain crop production. We can also kind of stave off pests without having to apply any costly chemicals, and we can conserve biodiversity, which we know has important environmental implications. And so we do this by shifting to a focus on soil biology. So this is a pie chart of the composition of soil. So the mineral portion is really the bulk of it, and that represents the sand, silt, and clay that we know about. 50% of it is pore space, so that just serves as healthy transfer of air and water. You know, all organisms need those to survive, including us. And so that transfer of air and water supports the soil biology that exists. And then 3%, on average, it can be between typically 1% and 5%, is organic matter, which is anything that is living or was once living. So of course, roots and plant matter make up a lot of organic matter, but then there's also this really complex, massive food web that exists and is comprised of fungi and bacteria that we can't even see, all the way up to Yeah, I like the dirt enthusiasm, although soil, not dirt, which we talked about before. All the way up to macrofauna like earthworms and arthropods, and then even some, we could even include cattle as like part of this food web too. So yeah.
Two questions, Lisa. Well, and maybe this is for everybody. I know the Grand Valley is more deficient in organic matter in the soil than other parts of the state. Where are we at in the Grand Valley?
In terms of
organic matter, do we know?
So I think that's a good point. So I'm not sure about the percent content, and I'm sure it varies by ecosystem, but I think sometimes we think about a good measure of organic matter, which doesn't really exist, because if you're on the East Coast, you're comparing it to the natural ecosystems there, which are not water limited. So they have so much organic matter cycling through. Their rates are just naturally very high, whereas the standard here is a native prairie ecosystem, which I would guess to be around like 5% organic matter. And then if you're cultivating it, it's going to be a lot lower than that. I have some research sites in Southwest Colorado, which is even a little more dry than here, and the organic matter level started at 1%, which is extremely low. And so there are practices that you can but yeah, I don't know. Can anyone else speak to organic matter levels in the side of the state?
Yeah, I think you're perfectly right. It depends on the management. Are you talking cultivated soil? You're talking orchard or vineyard situations. Most soil samples I see are in the 2 to 3% range.
Yeah.
And I've seen significantly less and seen significantly more.
Yeah.
2 to 3 would be a reasonable number for our area here.
Right. Yeah, and I think the important point is just knowing what you're comparing it to. It's always a good idea to have kind of an idea for what the native system is, because that's almost like your potential, and that's what you could shoot for. Yeah.
And the other comment I think worth making is that we're talking about that percentage in the topsoil.
Oh,
yeah.
We're not talking about 6 feet down, you're going to find.
Right, yeah. It drastically declines for sure. But this, we're starting to put such an emphasis on soil biology because we know that these little critters are responsible for all of the functions that I mentioned before. They're really important for even building soil structure. Some of these are considered ecosystem engineers. They're like the architects of the soil. So they burrow through and then make a lot of healthy pore space so that we can have better infiltration. So we're focusing on the biology because we're starting to understand that they're really critical for the health of our soils. And so has anyone seen this rainfall demonstration? Yeah. Can anyone describe what's going on here?
You're stealing one of my slides. Oh, you go ahead. Since me 5 minutes.
Well, can you go ahead and explain it?
Okay, so focus on the background first. You got from the right to the left. I assume this is exactly the same soil type, but it has a different amount of covering by something else on top of the soil surface. So here on the very right side with the red circle, it's basically a soil surface that almost no organic matter on top. And if you go from the right to the left, you see an increase of organic matter residue. And on the very left, you see actual living mulch, a grass in this case. And so what happened in the experiment that, a certain amount of rainfall was applied to those soils. And the soil, I'm assuming, is just slightly on a slope. So when you look on the very right-hand side, a lot of that rainfall that fell, and I'm assuming it's a heavy rainfall event, it ran down, it got funneled in that metal part, and ended up dripping into the glass jar you see on the right. So now you look at the glass jar you see in the front, it's reasonably full, at least a third. It's got a very dark brown color. It says a lot of water ran off, and it took a lot of salt particles with it because rainfall naturally is not that color, right? So if you keep going from the right to the left and focus on the glass jars in the front, you see that there's a decline in the amount of water you see in the front row in the glass jar. And also the color is slightly changing. It's a little bit less dark, I say. By the time you get to the very left, you see where the grass is, you see no moisture, no water in that glass jar, saying there's been no runoff of the rainfall that was applied coming off that grass into the jar. So that's part one. So you got a high runoff on the sort of bare soil surface, carrying with it a lot of sediment. On the right-hand side, on the very left, you see no runoff, nothing in the jar, so it's clean. But there's also a second row of jars behind, and if you look again from the right to the left, so that second row of glass jars actually catches moisture, that rainfall that has penetrated into and through the soil profile and in the form of drainage. And if you look again, starting at the very right, there is no moisture at all, no water ended up in that jar, saying that all the rainfall that fell on the bare soil surface ended up in runoff, most of it. And the little that was retained, it never reached the point of field capacity and actually would drain to a lower level. So that moisture, basically that rainfall, was very much ineffective replenishing the soil moisture. If you keep going to the left now again with increasing cover of organic matter on the soil surface, you start seeing just a little bit of water caught in the second example. And if you keep going to the left where the grass is, you eventually see more and more filling up. And then the final point, I think, would be if you look particularly at the grass example, you also see a change in color. It's not brownish, it's almost clear. So in other words, that drainage didn't take many soil particles with it. It's actually being filtered and cleaned, which was in the previous slide talked about the filtering effect of soil that it does to water. So to me, that shows very clearly the risk that we're facing with bare soil surfaces when we have heavy rainfall events, particularly if you've got any type of slope, which is the runoff, a lot of water not being effective refilling soil moisture, versus on the cover crop side, that's all going in, and to have drainage means the soil has to be at above field capacity by definition. So that soil retained some of that moisture. I think there's an evidence, if you compare the second to left and the left sample in the background, there's a little bit more moisture in that heavily covered, coming from the heavy covered soil compared to the grass. So more was retained of the same amount applied in the grass example. So to me, that's a really good example why soil cover and living mulches are important. It's a pretty drastic, explanation.
Yes, that was wonderful. Thanks for tag teaming this presentation.
So I won't explain this again in my presentation.
Right, very thorough explanation. But I mean, the point is that it's hitting on all of these ecosystem functions, and it's also focusing on how much nutrients can be really lost because of poor soil structure and a lack of biology. So this is why it's so important so that we can leverage the nutrients and inputs that we are applying to our field, and making sure that they're not just lost to the environment and causing downstream pollution. So I feel like I'm going a bit over on time here, but and I'll share these slides because I know this is kind of getting into the nitty-gritty information, but we started to look at soil health as not just the chemical indicators that we've always used, like NPK and even organic matter, and the physical. We're starting to focus on biological and physical. So bulk density is a measure of how much pore space and compaction there is. Aggregate stability is a really important one because it can reflect a lot of biological activity and also shows how resistant the soil can be to erosion, among some other benefits too. And then biological indicators, which are really growing in technology right now, especially. We're learning a lot about how different genes in the soil impact nutrient cycling. We're learning about the role of bacterial diversity in soil function and why that's so important and how we can kind of leverage that. And then there's also some cool research on macrofauna and how that can be a really easy way to measure changes in soil health. If you don't have access to a lab or you don't want to spend a lot of money on costly soil samples, you can just kind of see changes in macrofauna abundance in your soil, which is kind of a cool way that everyone can just kind of see and gauge what's happening in their soil. So we're kind of looking at it as a full system now rather than just measuring NPK and figuring out how much nutrients we need to apply each year. And then this is how those indicators reflect back to some of the functions. So I'll share these slides. I don't think we need to go into detail here. So the way that we do this, the NRCS has nicely defined 5 soil health principles that we try to use and we know have beneficial effects on soil health. So that's soil armor, minimizing disturbance, whether it's chemical or physical, diversifying our crop rotations, adding a continual living root, which Horst was saying that was really driving the differences between those 2 samples on the left in the rainfall experiment, and integrating livestock. So soil armor is really important in preventing against wind and water erosion. It's also great for minimizing evaporative losses, which can just be a waste of the precipitation that we're getting. And then it maintains healthy soil temperatures, which is important for not damaging the biological system of the soil. Minimizing mechanical disturbance is huge. We know that tillage has a number of harmful effects on the soil. It's kind of the ultimate no-no in soil health right now, and we're focusing on creative ways to minimize soil disturbance. Breaking up the soil just really makes it susceptible to erosion. It also makes it really compact, which then increases reliance on tillage. It also kind of provides this pulse of air to the soil so that it increases decomposition rates and releases a lot of the carbon into the atmosphere, which you're just kind of losing that internal nutrient reservoir then. Yeah, and it also can break up fungal networks. So if you think about mycorrhizae or fungal hyphae that extend throughout the soil and can actually extend the root zone of the crop so that it can be more drought resilient and take up deeper nutrient stores, it'll actually break up all of that network and then make it so that the crops can't use that as a way to gain additional nutrients. And then minimizing chemical and biological disturbance. So if we're over applying nutrients or we're over applying irrigation, that'll also just speed up decomposition rates and it'll make root systems more shallow. So we need to be really intentional about the ways in which we're applying those. And then providing a continual living root is really huge for just maximizing the carbon inputs. So the more months out of the year we can have a plant that's fixing carbon dioxide and putting it into the soil, the better. It also keeps the soil in place. It competes with weeds and then increases biodiversity, which in turn can increase the biodiversity below ground and the amount of soil functioning. Increasing biodiversity can increase the amount of soil cover because all of these different types of plants are using different nutrient reservoirs, both in time and space. So we can be maximizing the amount of nutrient cycling by increasing biodiversity and then reducing the amount of nutrient losses. This is also really great for farm economic resiliency to have multiple different income streams in case we have some sort of natural disaster that can wipe out sometimes an entire crop. And integrating livestock is just, I mean, I think about them sometimes as the same thing as bacteria. You know, they're just keeping the nutrient cycling in the system, and then also providing that economic gain in addition to whatever crop that you might be producing. And so there are a ton of different practices that we know improve soil health. No-till, cover cropping, diversified crop rotation, and organic amendments are some that we focus on just because they're kind of low-hanging fruit that might encompass a lot of those 5 principles. But I think, and you'll hear about this with the STAR program, we're really trying to focus on innovation in terms of soil health. I think that's something that's so great about the 5 principles is you can apply them in any different way, and every producer knows their land better than anyone else. So I think it's really time that we get creative with how to implement these principles and create practices that, you know, we don't talk about every day or we don't see on this list. So that's all I have, and I really appreciate everyone's attention and happy to answer any questions.
It's nice to see Dr. Evans' work from 40 years ago finally going mainstream.
Finally.
I'm just gonna stop my share and.
Any questions for Lisa? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Looks like there's a couple of chats. Are those some? Are those?
Oh, that's actually, I think,
Okay,
yeah.
got it.
This is slower than
Okay.
this, so, yeah. Horst?
I don't see an option to share my screen, but if you minimize that window there and share the big screen, open up the PowerPoint at the bottom, actually share the screen,
Share screen,
and then select the PowerPoint,
okay.
and then actually go all the way to the top, because it's sort of halfway down the presentation right now.
Oh,
Scroll it up.
here we go.
You gotta click on the top.
Oh, you didn't click on the top. Go back out. There you go. There you go. So I want to bring up back some of the concept that Jeff has talked about in terms of what soils do and put it in context of vineyards. So scroll down one, Doug. So when someone asks you about the soil at your site, how do you answer that question? Next slide, please. My guess is most of us answer somewhere like, I have a clay loam, I have a silt loam, I have a sandy loam, or whatever type of soil you have. And next slide. Why do we answer that way? How do we think that way? Because you trained that way. In soil science, you learn the soil classification, and this is what you have. And soil texture does tell you something about the physical and in some respect also the chemical attributes of the soil, but it doesn't tell you anything about biology. Clay loam is a clay loam. It doesn't say anything is healthy, not healthy. I mean, it's the clay loam. But soil is more than the sand, the silt, and the clay compartments, and air and water. So next slide, then.
Okay, let's keep trying. Sure, we'll.
You could give me.
Oh, wrong computer. Sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
So just to illustrate this, so even when we talk about the same soil type. So this is gyprock mesa clay loam. These 2 soil pits at about 8 feet of depth that we're looking at there are approximately 150 feet apart. And I would argue, even that gyprock mesa clay loam is not exactly the same in those 2 locations. And I hope that you agree with me. Otherwise, just speak up. Next slide, please. So that's just the soil that came out. And know how I say soil, it didn't say dirt. The soil that came out of this pit. And clearly it's very different between the 2. And I said it's about 150 feet difference in this particular vineyard location. So they're definitely not the same. So clearly, when we're describing soils just by the classifications, we have some shortcomings here. And the biggest shortcoming is, as I said earlier, it doesn't tell us anything about soil biology. So soil is a living medium. So I'm bringing the medium in back from the old classification, but it's definitely something we grow things in. Just like, we have media that we grow in greenhouses. So when we grow fruit trees or vines, we are both adding and removing things from the soil. And, by adding, I mean, we grow a root system. Well, that wasn't there before. So we have added something to it, but we're also removing, because if you harvest the fruit, peaches, apples, cherries, grapes, we're removing things, the fruit, which actually has nutrients in it. And they came from the soil. We're adding back leaves and prunings maybe. So that's the sort of give and take that happens in any farming system, really. Our trees and vines are really long-lived, and we really want to farm on that same land for a long time. I mean, hopefully, most of our vineyards in the ground today will be here in 30, 40, 50 years time and still be productive. So ideally, if you want to do that, we want to continue farming indefinitely. And the absolute minimum to farm indefinitely is we got to basically keep the soil at least at status quo. Because if you deplete it, you're not going to farm indefinitely. And so now, the new sort of push, if you want, is, so can we go that step further? Can we improve our soils from the status quo? Are they good enough right now, or can we do better? And, is that better going to give us some long-term benefits to our farming operation? And I think the answer to that is yes. So the organic matter is one of the key components, as was previously mentioned. And it has sort of like, for me, it's sort of like three principal functions. It's physical, biological, and chemical. And I just want to give you an example in the next slide on the physical part of things. Organic matter is sort of acts a little bit as a glue that holds together soil particles. And so you actually get soil aggregation, which is very important because it influences water infiltration, holding capacity, how much air is in there, the pore space, etc. Then organic matter breaks down. That's by no means a complete list. I'm just sort of highlights here. If you look at when organic matter breaks down, the microbiological processes, for example, nutrients, for example, are released. And they are now in a form that's highly available to plants. So that's the biological part and the chemical part being linked. And so we got more nutrients here. And I put a plus minus there because it is a plus minus. For example, we've seen some organic matter additions that clearly increase organic matter of your soil. It was very high in sodium content. So when that's being turned over, you got a sodium ions now at high concentration in your soil. And that's definitely not a positive, that's a negative, because immediately that will also impact soil aggregation. Sodium is really bad for soil aggregation. So you get an opposite effect. Go back one more. And so on the positive side of things, if you time organic matter addition and breakdown well, for example, maybe through a legume or an organic material that's rich in nitrogen, and it coincides with the uptake demand from our plant, then there's a positive. If that nitrogen comes out at a time when the plant doesn't have uptake, and maybe at a time when you have high rainfall or irrigation, now we might be causing nitrate leaching. That would be a negative. So all these things are linked, and we have to understand them better, basically, and we have to manage better. Next slide now. So I'm going to focus a little bit more for the rest of my talk here on organic matter and how we can influence it. As already mentioned, with tillage or no tillage, you have options. Tillage, every time you do it, it's sort of like, it's like you accelerate the breakdown of organic matter. Everything gets kick-started, and that's something that we don't want. No tillage, on the other hand, conserve that. How do we manage crop residue? That's one way, how we can change the organic matter concentration. Do we do additions? Biochar, compost, fresh manure. Do we have year-round ground cover? Because that for sure affects erosion control. How much erosion you're going to have. And I'm going to give you some examples from vineyards. So next slide. So as I already said, tillage does tend to increase the breakdown, the decomposition of organic matter. And every time you do it, you also increase the risk for soil erosion, be that wind erosion or water erosion. And as you saw in the slide, when the farmer was tilling the soil, there was certainly a lot of dust. Well, that's soil particles, right? So, and they're floating in the air, and they may not be down on the same place again. On the other hand, no-till tends to preserve organic matter. And of course, no-till also reduces the risk of soil erosion as long as you have cover. What do we do with crop residue? So leaves and prunings are basically a carbon source, and they can be used for building organic matter. So when we take prunings out of an orchard, for example, and burn them, that carbon is going straight to atmosphere. It's not staying in your orchard. It's not going to help build up organic matter. If you remove leaves, the same thing. So if we mulch or mow the prunings, they can help build organic matter. If you take them out, they're definitely gone. Additions are interesting because, different organic materials have different effects. And so the rate, the time of application really determines the long-term effects. So when you look at biochar, which, been very popular in the last 10, 15 years, that's a rather stable carbon. And it doesn't break down quickly. On the other hand, fresh manure is actually broken down very quickly, and the compost would be somewhere in between. Composts that have a very wide CN ratio, so carbon to nitrogen, so a lot of carbon, not much nitrogen, tend to break down more slowly. They can also lock up nitrogen that's in the soil. So when you apply very carbon-rich organic material that are low in nitrogen, it can lead to nitrogen-induced deficiencies on the crop. So you want to be careful of that ratio. So there's a certain best point, and it obviously depends on the crop. When do we apply the compost, for example? If it's applied during dormancy, much of it might not be available to the plant. Turnover is already happening, and it's not coinciding with the demand of the plant. So, there's a lot to be thought about with additions of amendments. Next one, please.
Do you want to address this question here?
Sure.
From Tiffany, does CSU have thoughts? Well, let me pull that back up. Does CSU have thoughts on flail mowing versus picking up peach prunings to control Cytospora?
I'm sure CSU doesn't have an opinion. and I don't think you want to hear my opinion on this. This would be a question to address to James Stewart. I know there's a concern about when you leave, wood in the orchard with Cytospora. On the other hand, if you have a very active, cover crop and breakdown of the material, I would be less concerned about it. But I'm by no means an expert on it. Again, I think that would be very different leaving prunings on a bare soil surface or prunings that are actually mulched within a cover crop and where there's an actively living soil organ that takes care of it. Very different scenario. Jane would be the expert on that one.
Okay.
So again, coming back to the year-round ground cover, it's really important. Remember that photo that I'm going to show next, I think, about the erosion control that run off when there's nothing on the soil surface. And remember, our organic matter is highest in the topsoil. So whenever we have erosion that takes away your topsoil, it takes away your highest organic matter content, and generally speaking, the part of the soil that has the highest fertility. So it's really the best part of your soil that's going downhill, so to speak. So we don't need to talk about that anymore. That would have been the explanation now. But we'll go to the next one. So for the rest, I want to really focus on cover cropping and why, when it can be used and where it is helpful and what it can do. So obviously, it improves soil structure. It has a potential to increase soil organic matter. It will help with water infiltration, reduce runoff, reduce soil erosion, depending on what cover crop we're using. So if we're going into legumes, for example, we can get more nitrogen into our soil. Again, caveat, is it released at the right time, for the plant to take it off, or is it just going to be building up and leaching out of the soil? You can influence this in part by managing how you manage the cover crop. Clearly, it reduces soil compaction. What I find, why I like cover crops in our climate here, particularly in our soils, is you all know when we have 2/100 of an inch of rainfall, you can't step on our gyprock mesa clay loam because you're, 2 steps later, you're an inch taller. It's very, very sticky and you don't want to go into a wet soil. Well, on our cover crops, depending on what we have, we can go into it anytime. There's no muddy footprints if I'm walking on my grass lawn that I have in the vineyard, for example. So that's one big positive for me, being able to get back in the vineyard faster. I'm not going to talk about the last two, but I've talked about this many times before, how we can use cover crops to manipulate how the vine grow and how it improves food quality. I'm going to very briefly touch on that. So let's go. So I just want to show you now a few examples from places around the world. Actually, we're going to start in Sicily in this example here. And Agneta Novara and her team actually did a long-term study, and Novara is going to come up several times here, where they looked at using cover crops in vineyards. And so they have fava bean with common veg, a subterranean clover with red fescue and ryegrass. Again, the subterranean clover with two fescues, red fescue and sheep fescue, durum wheat, and then durum wheat with veg. And the standard method of elevate maintenance in this region in Sicily is cultivation. So next slide, please. And this is just showing you the list of all these different treatments, so you have an idea what I'm talking about. Yeah, right. The other mouse.
No, it's there.
Okay, here we go. So what this team did for a number of years is looking at 2 years data in this case. They looked at, on the very far right, the C, that's your standard treatment, which is 2 to 3 cultivations during the season to control weeds, quote unquote, basically keep the soil free of vegetation. And in the gray bars, what you see is the amount of water runoff that came from those plots that they were monitoring. And it's not that hugely different compared to when you look at the black columns, and that's actually the sediment erosion that took place over 2 years cumulative. And when you look at the number on the left, 40 megagram per hectare or 60 megagram per hectare, that is 60 tons of soil. That's about something over 20 tons of soil per acre being eroded out of their plots annually. Okay, that's the average over 2 years. So next slide. So what does that do? So again, this is 9 years of data. So if you look at the far left, it says the soil profile at T0 or T1 basically, and soil profile at T. So if you look at that red sort of ribbon, that green ribbon at the top, that's where they started. 9 years later, the sort of purple, I guess, color shows the new soil surface. This is a slopey vineyards, but it's not extremely steep. I think the highest was 13, and the bottom is only like 1 or 2% slope. And what happened over this 9-year period, that plus H you see on the left-hand side, is the amount of height that it was reduced by. And then at the bottom on the far right, you see another minus H. Actually, the red line, the purple line now is higher than the green. So what happens is you get a reposition of soil from the upper part of the slope down to the lower part of the slope. So wherever it's slightly higher, that means soil has been moved from somewhere to that new position. And the really scary part in this example is that plus H over 9 years in this particular site, this is the control treatment, okay, was 40 centimeters. Okay, that is 16 inches of soil loss in the upper part of the slope, and about 20 was added at the bottom. That's pretty extreme, right? I mean, again, it depends on the cultivation method they're doing there, the rainfall intensity they have, and of course the type of soil they have is obviously it's highly erodible, but that's an example of what can happen when you have slope and you cultivate. So this takes you now to Spain, just northeast of Madrid. We have a very similar study here. We have 3 different treatments. T, the orange line at the top and the orange dots, is a conventional tillage. Again, in this area, about 3 tillage operations during the year to keep the isle free. Pachypodium is like a brome, a rough brome that was sown in fall, I think, and then grew throughout the season. That's the dark green line, and the light green line is basically just spontaneous vegetation. Anything that comes up that's been living there forever, basically is spontaneous vegetation. And so what they did in this experiment, they did a rainfall simulation, very similar, and they actually collected how much runoff is occurring after heavy rainfall event. It wasn't that heavy. I think they were applying something like 3/4 of an inch in an hour. So it's not a really heavy rainfall event. And so what you're seeing on the left axis is the percentage of the runoff that occurs over time. So by the time you get out to 24 minutes of this heavy rainfall intensity, you're seeing that over 25% of the water was applied to that plot has run off on the cultivated soil, with the brome that was sown is almost half, not quite, is about 1/4 or so in the spontaneous vegetation. Again, wherever there's cover, there's a reduction in runoff. And next slide. And with that runoff, and so is again, he's either 3 different colors again. The orange is the cultivation, the brome, the dark green, and the spontaneous vegetation, the lighter green color. And we have the line that represents the runoff percentage. And then the bars actually represent how much mineral nitrogen is moved with that runoff. And obviously, the more runoff you have, the more nitrogen you're actually losing. So this is where some of that sediment and that soil surface that's rich in nutrients is actually being moved out of the plot. So just an example of what actually happens to the chemistry in this particular case. And we're seeing about a 80 to 90% reduction when there is a vegetation, simply as a function of how much water is running off and how much nitrogen is being moved with it. So when Navarro and her team in Sicily actually tried to figure out, what is the carbon balance of a vineyard system in this case in Sicily. And so they looked at this Covera area, which is about 6,000 acres. And again, here we got like different management. We got the conventional tillage, which is standard in the area. They used a fava bean that was sown every other aisle, that's the ACC. Or they used the fava bean in both aisles, that's the CC. Or they use that permanent cover crop that actually barely does very well in that area to 40, so the subterranean clover. And she's breaking down here the balance for the vineyard and for the winemakers out there. This doesn't include the winemaking process. So it's just looking at the viticultural side of things. And she breaks it down into 3 different components. One is the emission that comes from the soil. How much carbon is lost from the soil? How much, so that's from actually CO2 exchange, breakdown of things, living organisms in the soil. The soil carbon erosion, and again, that remember that slopey hillside, how much was moving. And then the field energy fertilization is anything we do in energy we use in farming practice. So your diesel, whatever you use, your fertilizer, that all has carbon cost. And so the only cover crop, and that's why I highlighted it in yellow, that actually had a negative soil emission. In other words, it's putting more carbon back into the soil than is coming out by natural processes, was the cover crop in every aisle. The soil carbon erosion that you see under CT, that 9,000 there, that's what we're showing in the graph before. A lot of soil is moving downhill, just getting lost. And then obviously when you do less cultivation and go to a permanent cover crop, there's less in-field energy fertilization. But the bad news in their system is their vineyards are carbon sources. They are not sinks. They're emitting more carbon, they're losing more carbon from the soil than you're putting back in that example. And that's something we're obviously trying to address. Next slide, please. So I think this is a very nice demonstration of what actually happens in their system. So the higher the bar, the more carbon is being lost from the vineyard ecosystem. So when you go into tillage, obviously there's a lot that you're spending on fuel, which is, the big tract at the top. There's a huge amount of loss that comes from soil erosion. And there's also the soil activity, the actual living part of CO2 exchange. And as you go down that step there, you can see with the permanent cover crop, you had the lowest carbon footprint, if I might call it that way, in the system. But they still have a ways to go because they are definitely not, they don't gain carbon in their systems, they're losing it year in, year out. So let me take you now to California, to Monterey in this case. This is a study by Carrie Steenworth and her team. And so highlighted here, and so in this particular vineyard, what they did, this is 5 years after they've gone from a cultivation method to actually having annually sown rye or Trios triticale. And so that rye or the triticale is actually sown in November in California and is allowed to grow throughout winter. They got the climate for it, we don't. And then it's mowed sort of in April or May, and then it's basically done, but it's not cultivated. And what that shows you, the total soil C, so total soil carbon is another way to look at, organic matter. It's another indirect method to measure organic matter. How much organic carbon is in that soil? And what you can see after 5 years of this annual sowing of rye or trios, that you'll be able to increase the carbon stock in your soil compared to the cultivation from about 7.2 to 9.5 or close to 11. So pretty significant, 50% almost increase in the carbon in the top 15 centimeters. So again, an indication here that if we feed the soil with cover crops, we can actually increase organic matter concentration. And just finally want to show a little bit of our own data here. We've been doing some cover crop works now for, since 2013, and the cover crops we're working on are 4 different things. We got a crested wheatgrass as a drought-tolerant grass that will actually survive somehow without being irrigated in July and August. It doesn't look pretty, but it's still there. And the vines are drip irrigated. And then we have 3 treatments where the vineyard is micro-sprinkler irrigated. And so in the aisle, we have either hard fescue, we have a legume mix, which is almost exclusively alfalfa by now, and we have a grass and legume mix, and I like to refer to that as our orchard mix. So next slide. And so here's an illustration of, from left to right, the crested wheatgrass. Remember, as drip irrigated vines, there's no water applied in the alleyway. And what we're looking at here is the biomass on a dry weight basis that we are collecting from the alley, from the drive middle, in grams per square meter. And it's pretty obvious that you got some very, very large difference here, where our legume, the alfalfa, is about 5 times as much biomass, dry weight, produced compared to the crested wheatgrass. Well, we're putting water on the legume, not on the crested wheatgrass. The orchard mix is second, and the hard fescue is third. So next slide then. And 5 years after we put this cover crop in, we did the first time that we actually looked at soil organic matter. This is in the top 6 inches. And you can see pretty much a trend here that is similar to, let's go back one, to the biomass that we are producing. We're producing the most biomass with the legume. Second is the orchard mix. Third, the Aurora Gold, and then the crested wheatgrass. And then if you look at the organic matter, which, it's not a huge increase, but we're going from a 2.15 in crested wheatgrass to a 2.65 with alfalfa. And I will never expect this to be 5 in our climate. I don't think I'm going to see that. This is not, in our hot growing region, we're not going to see those type of organic matter concentrations, but it's at least a 0.5% increase. And that has some benefits to us. The other thing, of course, that I want to quickly touch on, when you have a legume, legumes are high in nitrogen. And so this graph just shows what we do when we mow the cover crop. We actually take samples and we analyze them for their nutrient content, nutrient concentration. And so obviously the green line is the legume. It has a fairly high percentage nitrogen in the biomass, whereas the other ones that are more grass-based are significantly lower. You notice that the crested wheat grass, there is no observation in August, simply because there was nothing to be mowed. It's basically not even growing. So next slide. So that high nitrogen that we're getting from the cover crop has resulted in an increase in the nitrogen concentration in the Chardonnay leaves at Veraison when we test them. So you see the starting point, 2013, there's a little bit of difference there, but very clearly where we have a legume cover crop, the Chardonnay leaves have had higher nitrogen concentration. In other words, some of that nitrogen is getting into our grapevines. And that's even better illustrated when you look at the next slide, which actually shows the nitrogen concentration in the must. And we refer to this as YEN, yeast-soluble nitrogen. So the yeast, to do a healthy fermentation, needs nitrogen. And the higher the sugar of the grape, the higher the YEN demand of the yeast is. Generally speaking, for most of the maturity of the grapes that we harvest, you probably want to be at 250 grams per liter. That would be a reasonable number. Obviously, when we're looking at the legume, every single year, we don't just see more nitrogen in the leaf, we also see more higher values in the grape itself. I'm not sure I want 450, but those first 3 years were actually a light crop, and the big crop you see in 18 and 19 is a function of much higher crops. So when you have higher yield, your YEN is going to be lower. But with legumes, we are still above, I think, what I would consider a reasonable number for grapes.
And the question was, one more time, please, what's in the legume mix?
The legume mix was actually a mix, and it's now almost pure alfalfa. We had birds for tree fall in it, and it never took. Alfalfa basically just outcompeted it. So, next slide. So I want to also just, we talk about cover crops as, the really good thing, but I want to just word of caution. Cover crops do require water, and they do compete with trees or vines for that water. And I've shown my own data from New Zealand many times. And this is an example. This actually comes from Portugal. And in this case, again, you're looking at the dotted line and the circles of soil tillage, 2 to 3 operations every year, versus the resident vegetation in the triangles, or a sown cover crop, which in this case, I don't remember what it was, I have to look it up. Again, only read it yesterday, I forgot. So, but very clearly you can see wherever you have a cover crop, and shortly after bud break, you're starting to see a difference in the soil moisture content measured in these vineyards. And that's pretty consistent between the 2 years. And in that peak at Veraison, and sometimes you're looking at 5 or 6% difference in soil moisture. That's a lot of water that these cover crops have removed and is still available when you have soil tillage. Next slide, please. So for us here with our long-term study, we can get by with drip irrigation somewhere between 12 inches of application per year. Depends on the year, sometimes you're a little bit higher, sometimes you can actually be lower than that. With our cover crops, we're applying right around 36 to 40 inches, because that's what it takes to keep alfalfa growing and keep the grass growing, keep it green. Of course, we could go less, but then that would also mean we have less biomass. It is not what we want. We want to actually grow a very healthy cover crop so that we can have better soil, soil health, soil biology. So here's one approach that you can do. Again, this is on a slopey hillside here in near Rüdesheim, and the river down there is the Rhine. And what this farmer has done here, this vineyard is done, they actually cultivated every other row. So half the vineyard is tilled, the other half is not tilled. That obviously reduces the water competition for the vines quite a bit. Next slide, please. But on this hillside, and you don't see the steeper part of that side, it gets pretty steep. So any heavy rainfall event shortly after this cultivation has taken place, you'll find a lot of this vineyard soil at the bottom. So there's another way of looking at it. In this particular case, the vineyard owner decided to actually mow every other row. The water use of a freshly mown cover crop is significantly less than that of the full cover crop you can see in the first and second row. So there's another way of actually influencing how much water is lost by the cover crop from a vineyard. The other thing here also is Every time you mow and you start putting organic matter back, you're also starting to start the cycle of that nutrient breakdown. So timing of operations, timing of when you mow can actually be very critical so that you can have that breakdown occurring at a time when the vines actually need these nutrients, when the demand is high. So this is done for two different reasons here. One, water, and two, making the nutrients available at the right time. So that was a very quick rundown. I'm gone maybe what time, I don't know. So we're back to our list, and I certainly didn't touch on everything on that list, but I just wanted to give you some examples from what can be done or is done, in vineyards, but particularly in vineyards. I focus on the vineyard in this talk. So, any questions?
So what do you see on the last two bullet points about vine growth and fruit quality?
Yeah, so the question is, what do I see on vine growth and fruit quality? And that would be another 1 hour lecture. Yes, we can definitely alter how vines grow, particularly because of the effect on the water status. So if the cover crop removes moisture from the soil and you're in a situation where you have maybe more moisture than you want, it puts the vines under some stress. That will reduce vegetative growth. When you reduce vegetative growth, you immediately have an impact on food quality. I mean, you don't want to stop the vine from growing too early, but it helps with opening up the canopy. You don't have as much canopy work to do. What is most often seen when you do deficit irrigation or use cover crops to draw out water, you get an advancement in fruit ripening. You tend to get a reduction in acidity, an increase in sugar. So that's a direct effect. You have indirect effects by having less dense canopy, that you might actually end up with less disease pressure because the canopy, when it rains, it's open, so it dries up faster. So there are all these secondary effects. A more open canopy, the fruit is more sun exposed, which will have an immediate impact on fruit color. It can be the flip side, because in our hot climate, we don't want to overexpose fruit. So if you go too far and the canopy is too open, you get sunburn. So that's where the climate you're in and what you're trying to achieve is very, very important. So I've given talks in the past about my work in New Zealand. We use cover crops deliberately to stress vines because they were too vigorous. We tried to slow them down, and it was very successful. And when 30 years ago, clean cultivation or herbicide was the standard in the region I worked in. Today, 99% are permanent cover crop. It doesn't happen anymore. And the concern about the water, they have a lot more moisture than we have in rainfall. It's, was overstated. It's been widely adopted. So yes, we can impact food quality and vine growth. And the same applies for tree growth too.
Question, can you talk a little more about timing cover crop mowing to provide nutrients to the vines?
That's a very tricky question. So one of the things we think we know, and there's conflicting evidence from different research teams, is that, for example, the timing of nitrogen demand. So the European data suggests that nitrogen demand is highest about from the period 3 weeks prior to 3 weeks after bloom. So if you want some of the nutrients from a cover crop to be available in that window, you have to time your mowing accordingly. And it's not like when you mow, the day you mow, it becomes available. You got to have that breakdown occurring to make that happen. So the mowing operation should probably be, 4 or 5 weeks prior to bloom if you want to target the pre-bloom period, or certainly pre-bloom if you want to affect any of that. Okay, that would be the short answer. We don't know much about there's no defined peak, let's put it this way, for other nutrients that I'm aware of. Nitrogen is the one where we always focus on that. Bloom window is where most of the uptake takes place. Depending on climate, there can be significant uptake late in the season, but I don't think that's happening for us. And when I'm talking late in the season, I'm talking in very mild Mediterranean climate where sometimes the leaves don't even fall off till February. So there's a very, very long post-harvest period, and you can time some of that there. That is a time also for potassium uptake. So that would be a timing where For fertilization, potassium would be at that time of year, but not necessarily through a cover crop. Hope that answers the question. Yeah.
Have you seen anybody in the valley or in your work use like an animal management system to act as the mowing agent?
So the question is about, don't know if anyone is using an animal management system to actually,
To mow?
bring that
Yeah.
to mow or to bring, fertilizer in maybe in an organic form. I'm only aware of one grower who actually using miniature sheep. And they using it to, basically keep the I don't like the word weeds, the other vegetation other than grape under control. Now in this particular vineyard, it's also planted to cold hardy cultivars, so everything was in a high corner, and so the grapes are nowhere. The sheep are nowhere near where the fruit is high up, and any shoots that are reaching all the way down to the ground. The grower doesn't mind if the sheep eat those leaves because it's too much anyway. They're just in the way. But that's only one I know of. And of course, they keep it out wherever they have new plantings.
I think sheep hoods to selectively look at the grazing, I think those are adorable.
It's like they're talking, they can fight it a little bit.
Yeah, they're humane, they're animal friendly, but I think that's awesome.
So are there concerns with, and this probably applies more to fruit than grapes, which are going to get turned into wine. Are there concerns with, what am I trying to say? Food safety, produce?
For animal, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm not an expert, but I think the recommendation is not to have animal in an orchard or any food production system. You can have them in dormancy.
Okay.
Not during fruit present.
Okay.
Yeah.
And wine grapes would be exempt, maybe
Because the
because
kill step.
maybe, a big maybe, but yeah.
No, I think they are because you have sheep grazing during the season in other places in the world, and in the United States too.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah. I mean, that's one way how you can actually introduce, for example, animals into a vineyard. If you don't want an in-season, it's right after leaf fall, after the fruit's been harvested at that time of year. But if you're concerned about the sheep and never use goats, they just jump onto everything.
And eat everything.
They're very destructive. If you don't want them in there because of eating the wrong type of leaves or getting into the fruit, then post-harvest or when the leaves are off is another way to bring them in. Or if you have any cover crop growing prior to bud break, that's another time.
Yeah.
And in New Zealand, they do a lot of winter grazing in vineyards.
Okay, any other questions? Do we, we are a bit behind. Do we want to reconvene at 10:35 and 40?
10 minutes.
10 minutes?
Yeah.
So let's say 10:35, we'll take a break and we'll be back shortly. So Anthony, thanks for joining us. We are running a bit late. You're just in time for the break. We'll be back shortly. Thank you all.
I'm not
seeing Jane in the break.
That was 5 minutes ago.
I mean, they're one of the best converters from grass into protein and anything, and their benefits for soil health because they're not doing pelleted excrement is insane.
And you have fun.
All right. We are back. Thank you all. So next on our agenda is the STAR program. And I believe Lisa and Cindy or no, I'm sorry, Helen. And I'll let you guys just jump in here.
All right, I'm gonna get us started. And then I'll hand it over to Helen in a few minutes. So again, I'm Cindy Lair, and I'm I run a lot of conservation programs for the Department of Agriculture. And over the years, we work on water quality, we work on production, We work on water quantity, which I know you all are very serious about, rightfully so. We deal with drought. All of these things that we're dealing with. And interestingly, there's a separate state agency to deal with just about all of those things. But I work with all those different agencies on all those things. And quite a few years ago, I started recognizing there's this common theme there, and it's called soil health. And soil health seems to have something to do with all of those really important resource issues. And so at the time, I talked to the Commissioner of Agriculture and said, you know, with climate changing and with the potential for carbon banking and things like that, also water quality, water quantity, resilience, you know, just you name it. Why can't we look at building a soil health program at the Department of Agriculture to help with that? And I was told, Cindy, we're not going to tell people how to farm. And so I said, okay, I'll leave it alone. But I've always kind of been in my corner thinking about that. And then in 2018, we had this brilliant young woman, Kate Greenberg, come in to be our commissioner. And I knew her before, and she said, Cindy, what kind of things do you think we should prioritize? Because I really want to do something big. And I said, well, what do you think about soil health? And she said, that's it, we're doing it. And it was a wonderful opportunity to really break into this world of helping farmers where they are at soil health. And I want to express that we recognize that we're not here to tell people how to farm. We aren't the ones out there on the land that are taking big risks and changing things. But we do have the ability to help incentivize, help find ways to provide more technical assistance, especially partnering with CSU and NRCS. And then also finding ways to provide more opportunities for financial assistance to help reduce that financial risk. What we have isn't going to change anybody's life, but hopefully with the different practices and the different parts of this program, which we're going to explain, that will bring it and make it more easy to try new things. And we aren't striving for perfection. And that's what I really like about the STAR program. And several years ago, I met Helen Silver, and she walked into my life, and it was a wonderful thing because we started talking about what would a soil health program look like. And then I went to the National Association of Conservation Districts meeting, and I heard these people speak about it from Illinois, and they had created this program, and I was learning about it. And then it was the STAR program, and they called it Saving Tomorrow's Ag Resources. And I said, you know, this might be a good thing for us to be able to apply it in Colorado. And I'm kind of getting away from my slides here. And then, we thought that might be a big help for us to be able to deliver that program locally. But anyway, we said, you know, we can't just run this all by ourselves. We can't just start at the state level and just do something. We needed to have more public support. And so we got together with a lot of different partners, and I mentioned some of them, but Helen was working for Gene Kelly at the Colorado State University, and we had NRCS, and we had some interested philanthropists that wanted to help, and the list goes on, but a lot of grower groups. And we said, let's have this Colorado Collaborative for Healthy Soils. And within that Colorado Collaborative for Healthy Soils, we just wanted to hear from all stakeholders. What should we be doing? What shouldn't we be doing? What do you want from this? What's been done that we don't want to redo? And we had this process where we could have different subcommittees to focus on different things. And thankfully, we have Helen, who also has a pretty robust background in environmental law, and she basically wrote this bill with the help of a lot of people and input of a lot of people. And poor Helen, she was getting so much input and trying to please so many different people. We were able to have House Bill 211181 pass finally last year. And it creates this possibility for a voluntary soil health program in the Department of Agriculture. And so that was the start of, I don't think of it as the start because it seems like we started so much longer before that, but that really got us on the path of working this forward. And is that how you say? Oh yeah, okay. And that really moved us forward. And the sad thing is in the legislature, it's really hard to get new programs started if you put the fiscal note on that bill. And so we don't have money attached to it. However, Max Newmeyer is also on our team, and he came about and helped a lot with the Colorado Collaborative for Healthy Soils. He'd never done grant proposals. And lo and behold, we found that that is really a true talent for Max. And he's put together several different proposals, and he's gotten almost every one of them. But we've gotten a 319 grant, we've gotten a water plan grant through the Water Conservation Board, and a Conservation Partners grant, and also a Conservation Innovation grant. And those are helping to fund what we're doing with the soil health program. And I won't go into all of those different grants and what they mean, but what I do want to point out is we have 17 conservation districts in the state of Colorado that we have selected. We had about 22 apply for money. Got to point out here, what also helped us a lot was that we got $2 million in stimulus money from the legislature to work on soil health. And so that it was, I talked about years ago and wanting to do a soil health program and being told no, and just the door was slammed on it. And then since we've been talking about soil health and what could be done to help farmers be more resilient, use water more efficiently, and also have climate benefits, because that is in the news every day. I mean, you cannot. It's in the news every hour. It's in everything we think about now. And so being able to have this opportunity to help the conservation districts be able to implement this locally it is really a priority for us at the Department of Ag. I want to point out here that the Delta Conservation District is the closest conservation district to you all, and they are covering the STAR program, which we're going to get into in a little bit here. The STAR program is being implemented by Delta, and it's covering Delta County as well as Mesa County. And so that's where you would go. You go to the Delta Conservation District in Delta to get more information on this. And then also the Chavano Conservation District, which is headed up in Montrose. That might cover some people as well. But they're the ones that are overseeing it for this local area. And so I made reference to this Saving Tomorrow's Ag Resources. It was created in Illinois. And as you well know, we're not corn and soybeans here in this area. And Colorado's agriculture is so much more diverse. And we recognize going into this that it would be a lot of
extensively compared to what it used to be.
It would be a lot of and if you wouldn't mind muting your microphone, that would be great. So it is a free and voluntary tool, and we have a couple of different versions of it. We have regular STAR, which is more of a self-guided assessment on where you are in your own soil health journey. And Lisa and Horst talked about the 5 principles of soil health, and these forms and these surveys really go to asking questions that get to the things that you're doing, how much bare ground do you have? What's your crop rotation? Are you able to integrate livestock into your system? The neat thing about orchards and vineyards is that you really aren't doing a lot of serious disturbance like in other types of row crop systems. But we're really trying to help farmers where they are. And we're not asking for perfection, but just what you could be doing to make your own operation a little bit better, a little healthier, and trying new things. And the star system is 1 to 5 stars. And and I'll get to that in a minute, but we have these field forms that are part of that process. And when you're working with the conservation districts, there is a producer consultation, and you will work with a technical assistance provider if you want that. We usually recommend it just because when you're trying something new, it helps to get that expert advice on that. We do have different research components to this program so that as people are practicing it out in the field, we have some research that we're collaborating with CSU on so that we can make sure that what we're recommending and the different benefits and impacts from these changes are, we're able to characterize them and prove that some of our assertions really are working. And so here, those 5 soil health principles again, protecting that soil armor, minimizing disturbance, promoting plant diversity, and trying to, as much as we can, strive to have a continual living root, and then that integration of livestock. So getting to the stars. The stars, Steve Stierwalt, who is this was kind of his brainchild back in Champaign County Soil and Water Conservation District in Illinois. And he said, gosh, every time you go to a restaurant or a hotel or anything, there's a, 1 to 5 stars that you give something. And so why don't we look at that on our own conservation journey? And so, you don't just go into the STAR program and expect, oh, well, I'm going to get 5 stars. It's not that easy, really. And 1 star, if you get 1 star, that's pretty much a producer that's implementing practices that are similar to what about 80% of the fields of that type are doing in that region. So it's conventional. And then the 2 stars are above average, and the field beginning to implement these soil health practices and principles. And then onward towards the 5 stars, it just goes up from there. And a lot of it just depends on how many different principles you're able to put to work in your cropping operation. And so along with this goes a field sign, because as you're going up the ladder with your improvements, it's nice to be able to brag and show to people going by, and especially in wine country like we're in here, the public is always interested in what you're doing, and they're drawn to see the new things you're doing to make your operation better and more sustainable, and your stewardship of the land. They are interested in that. And so, why STAR? It's rewarding producers' efforts for doing the right thing in land stewardship. It's scientifically rigorous, and what we have put together. I point to Helen and to Lisa. They've been right there at the epicenter of the development of this program and the STAR forums the whole time. I have stayed out of it, but CSU has been integrally involved in this too, as well as the Agricultural Research Service and Natural Resources Conservation Service. We've had a really excellent team of scientists working on this. The goal has been to keep it flexible and adaptable, and finding the different pathways. There are lots of different pathways. There's no roadmap that can be right for everybody. And especially when you're looking at the diversity of cropping systems in Colorado, we never wanted to say, this is the way to do it and do it this way and you'll win. We don't prohibit anything. What is right for you may not be right for your neighbor, and we don't get into the strict nature of, oh, you can't use a herbicide, or no, you can't use this or that. Really, it's what's right for you. So no judgment as far as that goes. What if it's something that's going to improve your soil function, and it's going to work for you economically, then that's probably what you should be doing. And we're encouraging experimentation and continual improvement. So it's a year-to-year process with what we have going here. So STAR is something that could be done all by yourself. You don't have to have a technical assistance provider. What we have is also called STAR Plus. And a STAR Plus is where the money and the connection to the conservation districts is. And so STAR can be all by yourself. STAR Plus is with the conservation districts. It has a process that I think Helen is going to cover in more detail here, but and also the financial incentives and the soil testing with it. But we really tried to make it not overly burdensome for producers to do it, and also for local conservation districts or other groups to administer. And the real thing that we're hoping for with this is the marketing potential that the STAR program can bring, and to be able to document the progress and acknowledge the progress that the producer is making on their own land stewardship. And so what we like about the program with STAR, and also just improving soil health, is the monetary benefits that come back to the producer. Maybe production in a lot of situations won't be as high, especially out east on the Eastern Plains. The producer might see a reduction in yield, but by reducing some of those expensive inputs, chemical inputs, their net profitability might be more than when they were really just totally looking at production all on its own. And because really profitability is really what brings sustainability to that producer too. The producer gets technical assistance benefits, they get soil health benefits, and then, like we talked about before, the market signal. STAR for individual producers, I kind of covered that. You fill out the form on your own. It's available on our website, which I'll show in a little bit. And with that $2 million that I spoke about that we got of stimulus money, we have the ability to pay the first 100 producers that just do the STAR on their own to get a free soil health test in that, and also a sign for your field, for your fence. I want to cover something too, though. This is not an expectation that the whole farm, the whole orchard or vineyard has to be signed up in this. We really are asking them to sign up one field. And then there's something else I omitted, and that is ranches. This also, we're getting STAR for ranches as well. It's kind of hard to look at a ranch as one paddock. And so we're covering the entire ranch with the STAR program. But when it comes to more cropping systems, we are asking producers to use, one field, one stand, and that sort of thing to try this out on. And then hopefully you learn a lot with that one field, and then you're going to expand it to cover other fields as well. It's a 3-year, STAR Plus is a 3-year program, and that's the one that's administered through the 17 conservation districts. We have 3 eligible entities that are also working on it. And if you're wondering what eligible entities it could be, it could be a grower group. It could be a non-governmental organization. We have Audubon, we have Colorado Corn, and then also the Dolores Water Conservancy District is also a partner in this. And then conservation districts are able to receive capacity building payments so that it helps them be able to deliver this locally. producers are able to receive $75 an acre for the soil health practice that they employ. And they get a minimum of $1,000 and a maximum of $5,000 with a 100% match required by producers. And that match isn't a dollar match. It's actually pretty easy to do when you look at the labor and the different things that a producer does to implement these practices. And so the covered practices are very flexible. Most of them are included and advised technically by NRCS. Producers receive technical assistance, soil testing. We're putting soil moisture probes out because as we talked before, in Colorado and throughout the West, soil health is able to help utilize more crop, bring more crop per drop. Utilize that important moisture that and reducing tillage. It's amazing to think. A lot of guys say, "Oh, well, why would I plant a cover crop that's going to use my precious water and I need that water for my crop that I'm going to be making a living off of." But every time, and then they keep going on with continuous tillage. Well, every time you till, you get you lose about half an inch of water. And so it is a balance. And I think Horst was illustrating that too in Vineyards. So we're also, part of this is we're covering we're doing an economic analysis on the STAR program and on the soil health work too, because economically, if it doesn't work, it won't. If it's not working out economically, it's not going to work into the future. I'm going to skip over this slide. This is just a summary of the different grants that we're employing right now. I talked about am I going backwards? No. Okay. And these are the conservation districts that are doing it in the state. And the different colors just reflect different grants that we're working on. But our goal is to get 100% coverage throughout the state. But right now, we're really excited to have these districts that are interested in carrying it forward locally. And these are the partners that we have. So thankful for Colorado State University and the Natural Resources Conservation Service. We wouldn't be doing this without them and wouldn't want to be doing it without them. So here is the website. You can go to the Colorado Department of Ag's website, but and get there. It's just look up soil-health, and you could also Google it. But it's available on our website, and we have the STAR. Am I even taking? Did I take your spot?
So we can turn it over to Lisa to go actually through the different forms.
Okay, that would be good.
Yeah, but maybe really quickly, just we have time so folks can see. When you go to the Colorado Department of Ag website, you'll scroll down and there will be some background about the soil health program. What STAR is, because I know we threw a lot out at you during this presentation. And then you'll see if you STAR for individual producers, which is not showing up there.
There.
Oh, that's weird.
If you stop sharing, I can share it.
Oh, great, perfect. Oh, perfect.
This is our website.
Yeah. So do you want to scroll down, Lisa, to STAR for individual producers? Perfect. So if you haven't worked with your conservation district yet, which here would be Delta, we do really want you to go to STAR for individual producers. Orchards and vineyards STAR forms are going to be posted within the next week or two. So you'll see that they'll just come under all these other production types. And I want to note that we really focused on making each of these forms fit the production types. We took about 10 months to do that. And Lisa, who I'm going to turn it over to, is the unsung hero for all of this. So we did a stakeholder feedback group with viticulturists. I really want to thank Horst on that, and also with orchardists, and I want to thank everyone who participated in that, as well as Greg Lightis, who I just retired. And so we'll be posting these in the next couple of weeks. And Doug, maybe we can send an announcement too when they're
Absolutely.
posted.
Yeah.
Again, if you're not able to work with Delta Conservation District, it would be really great if you could still fill out a STAR form. There is a section for feedback that Lisa will cover. We do hope, these forms are not perfect. And we're gonna learn a lot from producer innovation and producer feedback, but we'll go in about a year and really redo these, so your feedback will be important.
Yeah. Yeah, so just like Helen was saying, we try to take the STAR program and then adapt it to all the different cropping systems in Colorado, which neither of us is a specialist in any of these cropping systems. I do my research in wheat systems. So maybe I was a little bit more knowledgeable about small grains, but there's 9 different forms here. And so it was a really intensive process of meeting with producers and specialists in these systems and asking, how do we apply these 5 soil health principles to these different systems? Because each one has its nuances. And yeah, this is a really iterative process. So I just say that kind of to cover our bases that it's not a perfect form. Yeah, we're really trying to get away from like the right prescriptive answer to soil health. So any feedback you all have is really appreciated. Yeah, so I'll just go through what, if you were to sign up for the STAR Vineyards program, what would that look like? And so it's comprised of a field form and a scoring sheet. The field form is just a Google form if you're familiar with that format. This is kind of like the back end, what it looks like, but it just has a spot for, some information about you and your vineyard. And then just to quickly, I'll go over the questions in more detail on the scoring sheet, but what does your water and irrigation management look like? What does your nutrient management look like? And then soil cover and living root and reduce disturbance. So you can see, the 5 soil health principles are showing up, and then livestock integration. And then like Helen mentioned, there's some feedback sections at the bottom. So any additional information regarding soil health, if you fill this out and you're like, I don't feel like this thing that has really worked for me was accounted for on this form, this is a spot to let us know about that. And then we can work on incorporating it into future versions. And then just some feedback about like how long did it take? We want this to be relatively streamlined and simple for everybody, where the questions and instructions clear, and how we can make it better in the future. So all of this gets aggregated on the back end of the Google form, and then we funnel it into the score sheet, which has the same, a row for each question, and each section gets subtotaled. And then at the bottom, they all get added together here. And then there are point ranges for each STAR rating. So 0 to 30 points is what we estimate most fields are gonna fall in. And so that's 1 star. And then all the way up to 5 stars, which would be more than 90 points, which means you are pretty much maxing out all of the sections here. So I think it's a little easier just to see the kinds of things we're asking on the scoring sheet. So I'll just go through the detail here. The top section is all non-scored. So that's just, logistics of the vineyard and how often you soil sample, what's your water availability like. And with irrigation, we start to score things. So what type of irrigation do you use? Are you using drip or micro sprinkler? And then these numbers next to each possible choice is how many points you would score if you're using drip versus micro sprinkler, for example. How are you determining your irrigation needs? So one way that we, something that's kind of unique to Vineyards here is it's more process-based. So rather than just asking like, how much do you irrigate? When do you irrigate? We're asking, how do you determine that? And are you kind of taking into consideration runoff and that kind of thing? So how are your irrigation needs determined? Are you observing runoff and how frequently? Are you incorporating strategies to reduce irrigation demand? So are you thinking about soil cover and some other strategies that are helpful in keeping moisture in the soil? And so that's just a short answer on the field form. And as long as you're listing something, you get the 3 points here. Is there any indication of salinity or acidicity problems? If you say no, you get 2 points, but if you say yes, then you have the ability to make up for those points if you're managing for it appropriately. For nutrient management, this is again very process-based. So which of the following methods are you including in your nutrient management plan? We don't penalize for synthetic fertilizer, that's half a point, but we do quite heavily incentivize for legume and grass cover crops, just because we know there's some benefits to diverse cover crop mixture, compost, manure. So if you have a nutrient management plan that's a little bit more holistic and you're taking into consideration a few different nutrient sources, then you'll get the maximum 8 points. Are you considering timing organic nitrogen amendments with nutrient or nitrogen demand? So Horst talked about management of cover crops to time the nitrogen release with the nitrogen demand. So if you listed something like that, you would get 7 points. There are a million different ways to consider timing of your organic nitrogen with the crop demand. And so as long as you're thinking about that and you're showing that in your field form, then you'll get the 7 points associated with this question. How are you applying synthetic fertilizer? We know that broadcasting results in quite a bit of nutrient loss. So we're incentivizing things like fertigation, banding in the row, applying through a foliar application. Do you avoid irrigating soon after applying synthetic fertilizer to the soil? We know that that can result in runoff and nutrient losses too. How are you determining your rate of fertilizer? And are you considering different blocks and also different years in the way that you apply your nutrients? I'll just pause here and ask if there are any questions, or does the format of the field form and the scoring sheet make sense to everybody? Okay, silence means probably yeah.
The chat, nothing in the chat. Oh, yes.
Oh,
Makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
So when you go through the form, there will be times when you wonder why, why you don't get a point, or only these many points, or you feel strongly about, you should have gotten more points on this and that. And as Lisa said, the form is not perfect, and we've made quite a few changes that I instigated based on going through and scoring a vineyard.
Right.
But there's still things in there that somehow to me don't make sense, but and all of your feedback is needed,
right,
to make this form better, and it will be iterative. I mean, it's like next year's form will be different than this year's form, because there will be changes to it. So I encourage everyone to go in, even if you don't submit it, you should, but even if you don't, just play with it, send us an email. This is stupid or whatever, right? Just let us know, okay? Because only that way we can improve the form.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, Horace. And I feel like something that's a benefit of the STAR program in general is the information sharing aspect, because hopefully what we see on forms would then inform technical assistance and meetings with other producers. So this can be a tool for information sharing too. So that's even more reason to provide feedback. So for the soil cover and living roots section, what methods are you using to maintain soil cover or prevent erosion? Cover cropping gets the maximum point value, but there are some other ways that you can also make up for those points. How many months of the year is there a living root from cover cropping? So we know that more coverage means more carbon inputs and also less erosion. How are you managing your prunings? How are you managing leaf litter? Are you using them as a potential like soil cover, or are you removing them from the system? In terms of reduced disturbance, again, we're not disincentivizing for chemical pesticides, but we are incentivizing for a more integrated management plan. So are you using improved tree and rootstock varieties? Are you fostering habitats for beneficial insects? Are you thinking about your pest management system holistically? Same with weed control strategies. We broke it up between the alleyway and the tree row because we know that's important. And then for tillage method, that obviously only really applies for the alleyway, but this is the chance to list any sort of soil disturbance that's taking place, even if it's hilling up for rootstocks or recreasing the furrow for irrigation. And this is weighted really low. We know that rootstocks are really important. For example, in small grain systems, I think tillage, no-till gives you 15 points. So it's the bulk of the star rating. Here we know that subsoil disturbance can actually be really important for the economics of these systems. So while we are giving some incentives for no-till, it's not going to make or break your star rating. The livestock integration, this is excluding table grapes for what we were talking about with health concerns earlier. But are you integrating livestock, which is incentivized? Are you also managing livestock for soil health? So that means retaining ground cover and incorporating the animal waste. So all of these sections get tallied up and then for your final point score. So anyone, once we get this posted in a couple of weeks, it might be interesting to just go through and see where your star rating might shake out on this scale. But does anyone have any questions about this?
I know we're running over. I just want to add one thing. We do ask for your email on the STAR forms and your latitude and longitude. I just want to note that when we have been constructing this program and it starts in the legislation, our privacy protections are extraordinarily strict. No one is going to be able to tell, beyond the soil health specialist kind of looking at these forms and aggregating the data, where you are, who you are, be able to tie any practices to you. And that's something that's been super important to us.
Yeah, that's a good point, Ellen. So, yeah, I think that kind of covers the inner workings of the STAR program.
Any questions, any further questions about the STAR program for Cindy or Helen or Lisa? All right. Well, let's switch over. Let's switch over now to what I probably inaccurately described as the retail side of this, but certainly the one that involves the winery tasting rooms, the farm stands, restaurants. And so let me introduce Jane and Anthony to talk about the Regenerative Recovery Coalition and Zero Footprint. So I think, Jane, you were going to kick this off. Please go ahead and share your screen if you need to.
Yeah, I'll definitely be sharing my screen. We're going to switch gears a little bit here. Just give me 1 second. So I am sharing this in a different way. So just give me, I know it doesn't look good now, but give me a second to orient here. All right, are you all seeing that okay?
Perfect. Yes.
Wonderful, wonderful. So yeah, definitely switching gears a little bit here. But hi, everyone. My name is Jane Allen, and I'm the manager for the Regenerative Recovery Coalition at the Alliance Center. I just want to start by thanking the CDA team for letting me speak with you all today to briefly share about a new program and then also to talk about some of our agriculture and healthy soil focused projects. So I guess just to correct Doug, it does face the retail side, but it also faces the farmers that are interested in soil health and having a connected network to share ideas and work on projects together as well. So starting from the beginning, the Alliance Center was formed in 2004 to bring people together to solve systemic problems. Our founder, John Powers, started the organization on the premise that there are a lot of amazing organizations working for a better future, but rarely do they have the opportunity to work together. And so the Alliance Center was born to create a space for organizations to collaborate on the tough challenges that we face. Our building is home to some of the leading environmental organizations like the Natural Resources Defense Council and Conservation Colorado. And we really work at the nexus of the environment, the community, and the economy, and have become known as a hub for sustainability in the downtown Denver area. But we've always looked for ways to leverage our network and expand our impact. So when the pandemic hit in early 2020, the Alliance Center actually hosted what we called the Colorado Emergence Series. And this was a series of listening sessions with folks across the state to help the government plan for long-term recovery. And in these listening sessions, we heard from hundreds of Coloradans, from ranchers and farmers to members of the Polis administration, to small business owners and everyday residents. And through these conversations, we actually heard hundreds of ideas to build Colorado forward as we emerge from the pandemic. And so no matter what we were talking about during these listening sessions, the solutions kept coming back to these 8 fundamental areas that you see on these gear icons on the left. We outlined the findings of these conversations in a report, which you can find on our website, and the governor actually included in his Build Back Stronger plan. But the momentum for carrying these solutions forward was really strong. And so we formed the Regenerative Recovery Coalition to work with our partners to carry the vision forward. And so you can see how that translates to the items on the right. These are the areas that we're working to drive change in. But I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, what the heck does a regenerative recovery even mean? Those are big words. We need to define them, right? So we define them in economic terms. So we define this as a robust, localized economy that abundantly meets human needs and equitably provides the resources that we need to survive and thrive, like clean water, energy, and food. We like to say that we drive action in 3 main ways. So the first way is working with key influencers and decision makers in the state. This could look like sharing the policy priorities of our members or providing guidance on the allocation of the historic amounts of stimulus funds that are currently in play. The second way is really accelerating the work of our members. So we have a lot of amazing members that are doing wonderful things. How can we accelerate and amplify that? A good example of this is our partnership with Zero Footprint, who's here today. We believe in their model to scale up healthy soils, and we want to amplify that work wherever we can. The third way is identifying gaps and implementing projects via our working groups. So we have right now 4 active working groups that correlate with some of the fundamental areas that I shared earlier, and several projects that we're working on. One example I can give is that we're currently working with 12 community colleges across the state and several industry partners to build programs that grow the workforce in the clean energy sector. We now have over 355 members in the coalition, and our membership is pretty evenly split between nonprofit and for-profit organizations, and then also individuals who have just signed up in their citizen cap who want to lead this change. This is just an example of some of the agencies that we engage with. We really try to have a top-down, bottom-up approach by meeting with key decision makers in the state, but also mobilizing our coalition to drive collective action and kind of creating those touch points for folks to kind of engage with these different agencies. But what does this all mean for you guys? So I just wanted to share a little bit about our agriculture and food systems working group, as this is probably the most relevant for the purposes of this meeting today. The agriculture working group is made up of food advocates, farmers, nonprofits, and businesses that meet regularly to share information on food initiatives throughout the state and also collaborate on projects together. This group is open to anyone, so if you'd like to join the group, please reach out to me and I can share the details on how to join. But the most recent project that the group has galvanized around is organizing farm tours across the state to really grow the momentum for climate smart agriculture. And this is actually building off the success of a project that they did last year. So they actually organized and planned a tour of several regenerative farms in the Gunnison Valley. So you can see the picture on the right is actually from Mountain Roots Community Farm. And a lot of the farm tour participants were actually coming from the Front Range region. So the group is working to expand this project to do more farm tours in 2022 with the main goals of bridging the divide between urban and rural areas of Colorado and connecting people to the food that they eat. And then also connecting farmers and ranchers across the state to one another to foster that peer-to-peer learning. And then just educating the general public on the importance of healthy soil practices and how it impacts our environment and our climate. These farm tours can also bring economic opportunity to farmers and producers who are interested in agritourism. And so if you're interested in participating in this or setting up a farm or winery tour, please definitely reach out to me. I can connect you with the folks leading this effort so you can learn more about that. So for my last slide, I'd like to take just a quick moment to share about a new initiative we are starting in partnership with Zero Foodprint and the Colorado Department of Agriculture, and that is the Healthy Soils Challenge. The goal of the Healthy Soils Challenge is to generate funds from the private sector for implementation of STAR conservation practices that we just heard about, and other climate beneficial NRCS soil applications on farms and ranches across Colorado. So the way this works is these funds will go into Zero Foodprint's grant program, Restore Colorado, which farmers and ranchers can apply for to implement practices such as, you know, all the things we just heard about, right? Applying compost, planting cover crops, et cetera. And then on the business side, as Doug was alluding to, businesses that are interested in supporting this Healthy Soils Challenge can add a percentage onto their sales to donate to this project and become a Zero Foodprint member. And so the goal with this is really to generate $5 million annually by 2025 to support healthy soils. So really trying to scale up the STAR and STAR Plus program with this model through Zero Foodprint. But to share more about what this looks like in application, I'll actually pass it over to Anthony Mint from Zero Foodprint to share more about how businesses can get involved and then also how growers can apply for the Restore grant program when it actually goes live. But before I do so, I just want to hold some space for any questions or comments that you have. I can also drop my email in the chat if you'd like to touch base later and learn more about anything that I shared today. But I want to just thank everyone so much for your time, and yeah, I appreciate being here today.
Cool. Should we do last call for a minute for any other questions, and then I'll go ahead and start?
Sounds good.
Okay. Well, feel free to interrupt me and ask a question, but otherwise I'll get started. So it's great to meet you all, and thank you to CDA for the focus on healthy soil and also for inviting Jane and I to present. So my name's Anthony. I'm a chef at this point, sort of turned climate crusader. And as Jane mentioned, here to present about Restore Colorado and the forthcoming Healthy Soils Challenge. Let me know if you're seeing a screen. Thanks. So basically, as Jane mentioned, we're sort of beginning as like a consumer crowdfunding effort, and it actually started in California and then has expanded to Colorado and is already underway through a collaboration with Boulder County and City of Denver. And then recently we kind of formalized a collaboration with Colorado Department of Ag, and that's why we're here today. And so I'll do just a quick overview, just so we're all kind of on the same page. This program will be kind of focusing on the term carbon, but by no means are we viewing carbon as this one-dimensional thing. You know, in many cases, like the soil biology, which itself is the carbon, is what is creating, you know, all the co-benefits, like the fire resilience and, you know, flood resistance and nutrient density and water conservation and farmer prosperity, really. And so I'll be talking about carbon, but it's really all the things like biodiversity and everything else too. And then, you know, I think we're not nutritionists or healthcare experts, but in recent years, the importance of healthy soil in relation to nutrition is really kind of ramping up. And so like as a chef, I probably would have thought like, you know, oh yeah, the good carrot, it's like twice as healthy or something as the flavorless one. But it turns out it's like many, many times more healthy. And so like you can see here, this is some research, you know, and the bars are just carrots from different farms or spinach from different farms. And you can kind of see like from one farm to another, the antioxidants vary like 90x, 100x, like the potassium, you know, magnesium, et cetera, varies like 15x. So it's just, it's radically, you know, important and almost like new science that people don't even understand yet, miraculously. And so, you know, both for climate and for health, healthy soils, pretty much like the most important thing. Of course, I'm kind of drinking the Kool-Aid on that. But so as we began this program in California, they kind of invited this public-private collaboration to generate funds to scale up climate solutions like regenerative agriculture. And so they really pushed us towards like an economy-wide intervention, you know, something that could start small but become really big. And so we all collectively, you know, with a bunch of experts, looked to Project Drawdown for guidance, which is this overarching kind of climate effort where experts are estimating the plausible adoption rate of different solutions like renewable energy or reducing food waste, educating girls, regenerative ag, et cetera. And then they kind of basically figure out like the cost benefit analysis of each one and, you know, how plausible it is at a global level. And what's crazy and really optimistic in my view is that society can solve the entire climate crisis, and it would basically take just $1 trillion per year. And I say just because that just breaks down to 1% of GDP. So we're not too late in the crisis yet to where it's like not solvable. If we could just kind of go from 0% towards regeneration to 1%, it would be possible. And Drawdown is also finding that food and land are basically the biggest solutions. So together, they're much bigger than, you know, electrification and transportation and all these things that are kind of the primary solutions most of the climate movement is focused on. And then in addition, they provide a lot of co-benefits. So some of the things we talked about earlier, you know, the resilience, the water conservation, the nutrition. And so, you know, I think California really wants to scale this, but it has to be really a big movement based on collective action and not just like a few rich people going to the farmer's market. And so as they were kind of pointing us towards models, they kind of focused on a model in renewable energy, which is where like $5 from the energy bill goes to improve the grid and a whole region can commit to 100% renewable energy. You know, and that's like a lot different solution than like changing your light bulbs to LEDs or turning off the lights when you're not at home. It's like transformative change of the whole production system. And so that's kind of the goal too with scaling regenerative ag. You know, it's not to change 1% of acres after 50 years like the organic movement. You know, I think it's a recognition that we need to change maybe 50%, 80% of acres. And fundamentally, we could easily get, you know, $5 on the trash bill to start composting and paying for the freight and logistics of getting that onto farms and ranches. Restaurants or hotels could add 1% or something. In many states, there's hotel taxes that are several percent. And so it's almost like at this point in soil depletion and the climate crisis, like the food system probably should have started funding healthy soil a long time ago. Meanwhile, the federal farm bill creates almost like subsidies for unhealthy soil. And so never mind that, but at least at the local level or the state level, we can start building our own programs to start advancing and scaling healthy soil. And so that's basically what the participating businesses in Zero Foodprint are doing. So if you're like a full Zero Foodprint member, you're simply most of them are just adding a 1% fee. So at the register or at an, checkout on a online retail page or something, or anything like that. And so, for the most part, customers barely even notice or are quite excited that someone's doing something positive with local benefit. And I feel like one of the best examples of this movement is a Subway franchisee in Boulder, Colorado, who, would love to go to the farmer's market and buy the $5, heirloom tomatoes and all the things. But of course, he can't do that. He's Subway. It doesn't work in the business model. But Tim is able to send, 6 cents from each sandwich or whatever it is to help a farmer apply compost and plant cover crops. And in effect, that's almost like what will actually change the other 99% of acres is when the food economy itself just starts internalizing some of those costs and then directly funding healthy soil. So on the farm side, we also are just meeting farms where they're at. And, it could be grass-fed, dairy or ranch with a carbon farm plan, and they're doing their next practice. Or it could just be, a conventional farmer planting cover crops for the first time on 5 acres. So it's sort of viewing regenerative ag and healthy soil as just that next practice and a continual spectrum of improvement and helping the farmer move forward wherever they're at. And of course, for the participating businesses, we'll do marketing work, provide materials, social media assets, impact reporting, and just like all kinds of things that they can use to tell the story either of their own actual impact or of, the collective impact. And so, at this point, the businesses and individuals that have been moving this forward have helped create as much climate benefit as not burning 3 million gallons of gas just since 2020, just with a few cents per meal and a few donations here and there. And so it's worth noting that this is not just like a donation program to farmers. It's not like aid. It's really rigorous and involves a lot of kind of science-based guidance. And so we're using the Comet Planner to kind of guide the deployment of capital. And so this is a program that was a modeling tool that was developed by Colorado State in collaboration with the USDA and is likely to kind of become probably like the nationwide tool for kind of advancing soil health and carbon sequestration practices. It just launched in 2017. And so they're kind of building up, and improving their data. But as you can see from the screenshot, it's basically like a list of the healthy soil practices, many of them from the STAR program as well. And then a little bit of detail about the practice. You can enter the county and the number of acres. And then basically the model can estimate, if you did that practice, it would take 99.1 tons of carbon out of the atmosphere per year. And so, maybe one year because of the rain or something, it's 103 tons, and a different year it's 94. And so it's not meant to, be like an actual measurement of what occurred, but it is science-based guidance on approximately what occurred. And nature is a dynamic living system, and everything's going to be different from season to season and year to year anyway. And so as we began this with California, they really felt strongly that soil carbon was best approached from a directional perspective instead of like a accounting, verifying each ton kind of perspective, because in those instances, far too much of the resources are sort of used towards testing and monitoring and middlemen and everything for market administration. And so we take that information and we work with the conservation districts and cooperative extensions and farmers. And so everybody is essentially submitting an application for a project with a defined scope of work, and then submitting a competitive bid for the cost of the project. And so in this case, on the top row, the farmers kind of saying like they want to apply compost and mulch and plant trees and shrubs on 18 acres. And they're seeking, in this case, $14,000 to cover the cost of the compost and the mulch and the freight to get it out to the farm, et cetera. You see A&R, the cooperative extension in this case, wants $2,000 to oversee the project. And so that that involves like, validating, making sure the practices are done at the standards that link to that model, taking pictures, providing an impact report. And so overall, the project has a cost of $16,000 and the experts estimate the benefit to be 1,195 tons. And so then we're sorting by, that kind of bang for your buck, basically, or what we call the climate ROI internally. And then we're basically just giving away the money, starting from the top of the list to the bottom. So if in a given grant round, we have $200,000, maybe we'll be able to fund 10 projects or something like that. And, if we had been successful in getting like 1 or 2 more restaurants on board, then we probably could have funded that 11th project or business. And so that's kind of the overview of how the program works. But hopefully it's clear that, this kind of framework could be adapted from county to county or state to state. So you could, prioritize water conservation or biodiversity or equity or whatever the region wants. But we're sort of like almost proving the concept that consumers want this kind of solution. They're willing to pay that penny. It creates many local co-benefits. And then in aggregate, those can start to make an immediate and direct impact in the field. And so I'd almost urge you to think about like the transition going on in the field over the coming decades, almost like an issue like recycling. And so in a lot of regions, there's kind of like a can and bottle redemption fee on a can of beer or something, right? It's like 5 cents for the can of beer. And, if that program didn't exist and we were just kind of starting those programs now, okay, we got to start recycling or, the world's going to end. How would we go about it? And so, one approach would kind of be like, okay, let's add the 5 cents on every can. And the other approach would be like, okay, or we could, charge a really high premium, ask the craft brewers to charge an extra $5 or whatever it is on the 6-pack that's made from the recycled aluminum. And pretty soon there's going to be like a huge market. Everybody's going to pay all this extra money for those cans made from the recycled aluminum, and it's, that'll drive recycling. And so you can like imagine those two proposals playing out, and it's like, immediately all of us would be like, okay, from the 5 cents, okay, millions of dollars will pour in, that'll easily fund all the recycling. And I think people will be okay with it. The other plan, it's like, well, will, millions of people really start paying for that cans of beer, made from the recycled aluminum? I'm not sure. But that's almost like the approach that the whole kind of organic movement, good food movement is working on, where it's like, oh, let's just create awareness, let's create huge demand for these things. And so, I'm all in favor of that. And in fact, that's almost like our background, which sent us on this trajectory, was running a farmer table restaurant that was championing regenerative ag and trying to tell that story and get the extra dollar. And after a few years of doing it, we started to realize like, I'm not even sure if we're changing any acres. And so that's really what led to this kind of systems change approach in collaboration with regional governments. So I'm hoping that the folks in the room will both apply for grants and start to, benefit from the program, but also will consider helping to support the program. And as I mentioned before, we started this in April of 2021 with Boulder County and City of Denver so far. And so we've already awarded grants to 11 projects that are, either already in process or just starting this spring and fall. And then this collaboration with CDA represents the expansion of the program to statewide farms and businesses. So I'll stop there and invite any questions. And sorry for perhaps a really dense info dump.
Thank you, Anthony and Jane. Yes, Jane, I apologize. I was mischaracterizing what you guys are doing. I guess what I got excited by the ability for wineries that may not have a vineyard to participate in the project. And yeah, I'm just really excited. So does anybody have any questions for Jane or Anthony? Jane did put her email in the chat. I will also, when I post these, post the recording of the session, which will have all the slides as you've seen them here. I will put everybody's, all the presenters' emails so that you can reach out with any additional questions that come up. But before we wrap up, comments, thoughts? I mean, is this something to, that merits more further attention? Let's see, this looks like a question. Anthony's, get in touch to learn about receiving a grant or sending a few cents per purchase toward more healthy soil. And I think that's great. I would like to see the wine board and cave, tack on that 1% to our ticket sales for WineFest or Colorado Uncorked to go to zero footprint. I think that would be a great opportunity for our industry.
Hey, Doug, could I ask a question for you or people in the wine industry in the room?
Please do.
I recently had a conversation with someone in beverage distribution. They were in like the booze world, but I was wondering if this paradigm applied also to wine. They said that distribution, like, Southern Spirits or just like those big companies typically retain 30% of the like wholesale price or whatever it is on distribution. And that of that 30%, there's kind of an industry-wide standard that 10% is for marketing. And so that's why you kind of have these things with like, blah, blah, blah event, like brought to you by Belvedere Vodka, or like the champagne buckets with the company on it or whatever. And so, they were basically like, this program should become the impact marketing program for every brand that has any millennial customers or any interest at all in climate or sustainability, because they could, just instead of creating all that swag and all that junk, they could sort of just use one of those 3% that's already earmarked for BEV marketing and then just actually make an impact, maybe even with their own farmers, maybe improving their supply chain, maybe just reaching customers in a new way. And so, maybe it wouldn't be for every single brand, but I think that a lot of big companies from like General Mills to Pepsi or whatever are taking a stand on regenerative. And so it seemed like the beverage industry was a really primed place for that, between like grain production in the US and then also that potential earmarked marketing budget. Does anybody know about that in the wine industry?
Well, I think, yes, that is probably a pretty standard breakdown of the margins at the wholesale tier. But I'd also point out that, for at least for the Colorado wine industry, our wineries are so small, there's only a handful that use the wholesalers.
Sure.
Most people self-distribute. And so I think that, and please, anybody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the breakdown of profit margins is drastically different for a small, family-run, family-owned winery than it would be for Republic National.
Right.
I think it would be great to get Republic National on board, because yes, there'd be a lot of opportunities for promoting this project. And, you're absolutely right that doing this for millennial customers and Gen Z is critical. It's going to be a little different on our scale.
For sure.
But let's keep talking about that. All right. Any other thoughts, comments, parting words of wisdom? I think this is really interesting. Would love to stay in the loop. Thank you, Tiffany and Vince. So, as I said, we will have the recording of the session. I'll be posting that. It'll probably be next week before I'm able to get that done, but it'll be posted on coloradowine.com. I'll send that out to the wine industry, and hopefully we can get that sent out through Fruit Facts as well. And, stay in touch, reach out to Cindy or myself at the Department of Ag with any thoughts. As Horst said, please look at those forms, the evaluation forms, because we do want this program to be as useful as possible. So, yes. Yes, thank you. I'm sorry, Cassidy, thank you for chiming in there. I want to thank Cave for co-sponsoring this event, and great. Well, if you were here in the room, I did bring our spotted lanternfly flyers and some new magnets the department has put out. Just a reminder, yes, the spotted lanternfly may be pretty, but it is not our friend. And I don't think the sightings in Colorado were ever confirmed. Right? So, yeah. So hopefully we don't have it yet, but you know, yeah, it could be on its way here. Thank you all. Everybody take care, and we will see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks to all the speakers.
Thanks.